My name is Carleton, and I'm 33 years old. Never thought my father's funeral would turn into the most humiliating day of my life. We had our issues, sure, but nothing prepared me for my brother Jackson pointing at me in front of everyone, saying, "She's just here for the money, Dad's going to cut her off." The room fell silent. Then the lawyer walked in with a USB drive. When my dad's face appeared on the screen, nobody expected the three words that changed everything. If you're watching this right now, let me know where you're from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling family as I reveal what happened next. Growing up, things weren't always complicated with my father. In fact, my earliest memories with him were filled with weekend fishing trips, backyard baseball games, and him teaching me how to fix cars in our garage. Dad owned Williams Construction, one of the largest commercial builders in our state. He started with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox, building it into a multi-million-dollar company through sheer determination and countless 16-hour workdays. Back then, our family seemed perfect: Mom, Dad, my older brother Jackson, and me. Dad was strict but fair, pushing us to excel but always celebrating our achievements. I remember him attending every one of my elementary school plays, sitting front row with his massive frame squeezed uncomfortably into those tiny chairs, beaming with pride. Everything changed when I turned 14. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, and within 8 months she was gone. Dad completely shut down emotionally. The warm, occasionally playful father disappeared overnight, replaced by a hollow-eyed workaholic who buried his grief under mountains of blueprints and contracts. Jackson, who was 18 then, responded by becoming Dad's mirror image: practical, business-minded, and laser-focused on success. He enrolled in business school, interned at the company during summers, and constantly talked about the family legacy. I handled my grief differently. I retreated into art, music, and writing, the creative pursuits that helped me process the tsunami of emotions that threatened to drown me. By the time I graduated high school, the divide between my father and me had grown into a chasm. Every family dinner devolved into tense conversations about my future. Art school, Dad would scoff, pushing away his plate. "And what exactly will you do with that degree, Carleton?" "Draw pretty pictures while living in my basement." "It's digital media design, Dad. There are plenty of career opportunities." "Not like construction. Not like real work," he'd counter, while Jackson nodded in agreement. I went to art school anyway, paying my own way with scholarships, part-time jobs, and student loans. Each holiday break, the tension grew thicker. Dad and Jackson would talk business at the dinner table, deliberately excluding me with their jargon and inside jokes. When I tried sharing my achievements, winning a design competition, landing a gallery showing, they'd exchange those looks that screamed, humoring the family disappointment. Dad remarried when I was 25. Diana was only 15 years older than me, a sleek, polished woman who'd worked in high-end real estate. She never tried to be a mother figure, treating me more like an unwelcome houseguest whenever I visited. She and Jackson, however, formed an immediate alliance. Diana understood business, appreciated luxury, and most importantly, reinforced Dad's growing conviction that I was throwing my life away. The final breaking point came 3 years ago. I'd established a modest but growing reputation as a commercial artist and had landed a significant contract designing a multimedia campaign for a national brand. Proud of finally having something Dad might respect, I drove home to share the news. I arrived to find Dad, Jackson, and Diana celebrating Jackson's promotion to Vice President of Operations at Williams Construction. The table was laden with expensive champagne and congratulatory desserts. When I tried to share my news, Jackson interrupted. "That's great, little brother, but we're talking about millions in new contracts here, not some cartoon drawings for a coffee chain." "It's a complete digital strategy for their national rebrand," I corrected, feeling my face burn. Dad sighed heavily. "When are you going to grow up, Carleton? Your brother is helping build something that will last generations. What will you leave behind? A bunch of digital files that'll be obsolete in 5 years. Something in me snapped. Years of dismissal and disappointment erupted in a heated argument. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. I called Dad a cold, emotionless machine who couldn't see value in anything that couldn't be measured in profit margins. He called me an ungrateful dreamer living in a fantasy world. "You're no son of mine," he finally shouted, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to rattle the crystal. No son of mine would waste his life like this. I walked out that night and didn't speak to him again. For 3 years there were no calls, no texts, no holiday cards. I heard about family events through distant cousins. Jackson got married. Dad expanded the business into neighboring states. Life went on as if I'd never existed. Then 2 months ago, I received a call from my Aunt Teresa, Mom's sister who had stayed in touch over the years. "Your father's in the hospital, Carleton. It's pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors are saying weeks, maybe a month." I was shocked into silence. Despite everything, I'd never imagined a world without my father in it. I asked if I should visit. "I think you should," Aunt Teresa said softly. "He's been asking about you." That same day, I booked a flight home and headed to the hospital. But when I arrived, Diana was leaving his room. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" Aunt Teresa called. "I came to see Dad." "He's resting," she said, blocking the doorway. "The doctors say no visitors except immediate family." "I am immediate family." Her smile was arctic. "Are you?" "That's not how I remember your last conversation with him." Before I could argue, Jackson appeared from around the corner. He looked more like Dad than ever, same broad shoulders, same stern expression. "Carleton," he said, voice flat. "Surprised to see you here. I came as soon as I heard." 3 years too late, he put his arm around Diana's shoulders. "Dad's been clear about not wanting to see you. He's made his peace, and he doesn't need you disrupting his final days for your own guilty conscience." I tried twice more to visit in the following weeks, each time being turned away. I sent letters, flowers, even tried to have Aunt Teresa bring a message, but somehow nothing seemed to reach him. And then, just like that, the opportunity was gone. Dad passed away quietly in his sleep, and I learned about it from the local newspaper's online obituary. The call from the funeral home came 3 days after I'd read about Dad's death online. The director, a Mr. Hastings, spoke in the practiced sympathetic tone of someone who delivers bad news for a living. "We're handling your father's arrangements, and I wanted to confirm details about the service on Saturday." "I actually haven't received any information about the funeral," I said, embarrassment coloring my voice. A pause. "I see. Well, the service will be at Oakwood Memorial Chapel at 11, followed by internment at Greendale Cemetery and a reception at your father's home." After hanging up, I sat staring at the wall of my apartment for nearly an hour. Part of me wanted to ignore the funeral entirely. Why subject myself to more family rejection? But a stronger part knew I'd regret not saying goodbye, regardless of how things had ended between us. I booked a flight for the next day, and a room at the Hampton Inn rather than presuming to stay at the family home. The flight into my hometown felt surreal. The familiar landscape below seemed to belong to another life, one where I was still somebody's son, not a family exile. After checking into the hotel, I received a text from an unknown number. "Heard you were coming to the funeral. Want to grab a drink? Zachary Feldman." Zachary had been my best friend throughout school, though we'd fallen out of touch over the years. That evening, I met him at Riley's Pub, a downtown dive we'd frequented in our youth. He'd aged well, with just a few strands of gray in his dark hair and the same easy smile. "Man, it's good to see you," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." Over beers, we caught up on each other's lives. He'd taken over his parents' pharmacy, married his college girlfriend, and had 2 kids. When the conversation inevitably turned to my father, his expression grew serious. "I saw your dad pretty regularly, you know. He'd come into the pharmacy for his medications." I stared into my beer. "How was he? Before the end, I mean." tough as ever on the outside. But something changed in the last year or so. He seemed reflective. Asked about you a couple times. My head snapped up. He asked about me. Zachary nodded. Wanted to know if I'd heard from you, how you were doing. I showed him that article about your design work for that tech startup. The one that was featured in Creative Quarterly. A lump formed in my throat. I tried to see him in the hospital. They wouldn't let me in. That doesn't surprise me, Zachary said, lowering his voice. Your brother and Diana. They've got quite the reputation around town. The way they've been running the business since your dad got sick has raised some eyebrows. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it apologetically. The babysitter. I should head home, but I'll see you tomorrow at the service. That night I lay awake in my hotel room, turning over Zachary's words. Dad had asked about me. He'd seen my work. What did that mean, if anything? The next evening was the pre-funeral dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. I arrived slightly late, steeling myself before walking in. The private room fell silent as I entered. About 30 people, extended family, business associates, and family friends, all turned to stare. Jackson approached immediately, pulling me aside with a painful grip on my elbow. What are you doing here? He hissed. Same as everyone else. Paying my respects. After 3 years of nothing. You've got some nerve. Diana materialized beside him, elegant in black, her makeup flawless despite the theatrical dab she gave her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. We didn't include you on the dinner list, she said. This is for close family and friends. I stood my ground. I'm still his son, Diana. Are you? Jackson snorted. Not how I remember it. Before things could escalate, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair approached us. Ah, you must be Carleton. Anthony Winters, he extended his hand. I was your father's attorney for the past 20 years. Jackson's demeanor immediately changed. Anthony, I was just about to find you. We had some questions about tomorrow's proceedings. As Jackson pulled the lawyer away, I found a seat at the far end of the table. Throughout dinner, I caught snippets of conversations, many revolving around the future of William's construction and speculation about Dad's will. Occasionally, I'd notice Anthony Winters watching me with an unreadable expression. After dinner, as people mingled over coffee, I overheard my cousin Meredith talking to her husband. I don't know why Carleton even showed up. It's not like there's anything in the will for him. Jackson made that very clear. Maybe he actually cared about his father, her husband suggested. Meredith scoffed. Please. He abandoned the family for years. Now suddenly he's back playing the grieving son. This is about the money, nothing else. I stepped outside for air, leaning against the brick wall of the restaurant. The door opened, and Anthony Winters joined me, offering a cigarette which I declined. Your father spoke of you often, he said, lighting one for himself. I couldn't hide my surprise. Did he? Anthony took a long drag. People are rarely as simple as we want them to be, Carleton. Especially family. He handed me a business card. The will reading will be at my office directly after the cemetery tomorrow. Your father explicitly requested your presence. As he walked back inside, Zachary came out, clapping a hand on my shoulder. How are you holding up? Everyone in there thinks I'm just here for an inheritance I know I'm not getting. Zachary leaned against the wall beside me. You know what's strange? Your dad came into the pharmacy about a month before he went into the hospital. He seemed, I don't know, agitated. Asked if I still had your contact information. Said he'd been trying to reach you. I shook my head in confusion. That doesn't make sense. I never changed my number. I never got any calls from him. Maybe someone didn't want him to reach you, Zachary said quietly, glancing back toward the restaurant where Jackson and Diana were holding court among the guests. The morning of the funeral dawned with appropriately somber skies. I dressed carefully in the dark suit I'd packed, studying my reflection in the hotel mirror. The resemblance to my father stared back at me, the same square jaw, the same deep-set eyes. I looked like a younger version of the man I'd fought so hard to differentiate myself from. I arrived at Oakwood Memorial Chapel 45 minutes early, wanting some time alone before facing the crowd. The funeral director, recognizing me from my father's photos, led me into the viewing room where the closed casket stood surrounded by elaborate floral arrangements. "Take all the time you need, sir," he said, quietly closing the door behind him. I approached the casket slowly, placing my hand on its polished surface. What does one say to a father they've been estranged from? The words wouldn't come, just a confusing jumble of anger, regret, and a deep, aching sadness for what might have been. "I wish we'd had more time," I finally whispered. "I wish things had been different." The door opened behind me, and I quickly wiped my eyes. A distinguished older man in a charcoal suit entered, carrying a leather portfolio. He stopped short when he saw me. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was in here yet." "It's fine," I said. "I was just leaving." "You're Robert's younger son," he said, not a question. "I'm Harold Benson. I served on the board with your father for 15 years. We shook hands, and he studied me with kind eyes. "He was proud of you, you know." I couldn't hide my disbelief. "I think you must be confusing me with my brother." Harold shook his head. "No confusion. Your father and I had lunch every month. This past year, he spoke of you often. He kept a file of your work in his desk drawer. Quite impressive what you've accomplished." Before I could process this information, the doors opened again as more guests began to arrive. Harold squeezed my shoulder and moved away, leaving me stunned. A file of my work. How was that possible when we hadn't spoken in years? The chapel filled quickly. I found a seat in the second row, designated for immediate family but distanced from where Jackson and Diana sat front and center. As more people arrived, I received curious glances and a few surprised double takes. Aunt Teresa sat beside me, squeezing my hand in silent support. Just before the service was set to begin, Jackson approached, impeccably dressed in an expensive black suit, his face a mask of appropriate grief. He leaned down, voice pitched to Carrie just far enough for nearby mourners to hear. "You've got some nerve showing up here," he said. "You broke his heart, and now you think you can just waltz back in like nothing happened." I kept my voice low and steady. "I'm here to say goodbye to our father, Jackson. That's all." He straightened, raising his voice slightly. "She's just here for the money. Dad's going to cut her off." The deliberate use of the wrong pronoun wasn't lost on me, one final humiliation in front of the community. Several heads turned our way, and I saw Diana's satisfied smirk from the front row. Before I could respond, Zachary slid into the seat beside me. "Everything okay here?" Jackson gave him a cold look before returning to his seat. Zachary leaned close. "Ignore him. He's been impossible since your dad got sick." The service itself was what Dad would have wanted, dignified, traditional, and mercifully brief. Several business associates spoke about his work ethic, his handshake strong as Okrut's integrity, his contributions to the community. A lifetime distilled into polite anecdotes and professional accomplishments. What struck me most were the subtle references several speakers made to how my father had changed in his final year. Harold Benson mentioned his renewed perspective on what truly matters in life. His golf buddy Thomas referred to conversations about regrets and second chances. Each comment was like a puzzle piece, forming a picture of a man I hadn't known existed, a father who perhaps had been trying to reach across the divide I thought was permanent. As the service concluded, I noticed Anthony Winters, Dad's lawyer, sitting near the back. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Something in his expression made me feel, for the first time since arriving, that I wasn't completely alone in this room full of people who viewed me as the family traitor. At the cemetery, I stood apart from Jackson and Diana during the brief graveside service. The minister's words about returning to the earth and eternal rest washed over me as I watched my father's casket being lowered into the ground. Despite everything, tears filled my eyes. Whatever our differences, whatever words were said or unsaid, he was still the man who had taught me to fish, who had applauded my kindergarten artwork, who had carried me to bed when I fell asleep on the couch watching late-night movies. As people began dispersing toward their cars, many heading to the reception at the family home, Anthony approached me. "The will reading will begin in 1 hour at my office," he said quietly. "I've already informed Jackson and Diana. Your father was very specific about having all parties present." Jackson, overhearing, stepped closer. "This is a formality, Carleton. Don't get your hopes up." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here for money, Jackson. I never was." "Right," he scoffed. "The prodigal son returns out of pure filial devotion. We'll see how devoted you feel when the will confirms what Dad told us years ago, that you're getting nothing." As he walked away with Diana on his arm, I turned to Anthony. "Is that true? Did my father disinherit me?" The lawyer's expression remained professionally neutral. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the contents of the will before the official reading. But I will say this, your father was a more complicated man than most people gave him credit for." With that cryptic statement, he handed me his office address and walked to his car, leaving me wondering what exactly awaited me at the reading of my father's last will and testament. Anthony Winter's law office occupied the entire top floor of one of the few high-rise buildings in our modest downtown area. The reception area featured dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and framed black and white photographs of local landmarks. It smelled of lemon polish and old books, the scent of established wealth and discreet power. I arrived exactly on time to find most of the family already seated in a large conference room. Jackson and Diana had taken positions at the head of the table, with various aunts, uncles, and cousins filling in the remaining seats. All conversation stopped when I entered. "Please, Carleton, take a seat," Anthony said, gesturing to an empty chair directly across from Jackson. The seating arrangement felt deliberate, forcing us to face each other. Aunt Teresa gave me an encouraging smile as I sat down. Uncle Warren, Dad's older brother, nodded stiffly in acknowledgement. The rest pretended to study their water glasses or the abstract painting on the wall. Anthony remained standing, clearing his throat. "Before we begin, I want to thank everyone for coming during this difficult time. Robert was very specific about how he wanted this proceeding to unfold." He walked to a credenza where a laptop and projector had been set up. "Some of you may find this unusual, but Robert prepared a video will to accompany the legal documents. He recorded it approximately 3 weeks before his passing." A murmur passed through the room. Video wills were uncommon, particularly for men of my father's traditional generation. Diana leaned over to whisper something to Jackson, whose expression darkened. "Is this really necessary, Anthony?" Jackson asked. "We all know what the will says. Dad made his intentions clear years ago." "Your father's instructions were explicit," Anthony replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. He dimmed the lights and started the video. My father's face filled the screen, and I felt a physical shock. He looked much thinner than I remembered, his once robust features hollowed by illness. But his eyes, those penetrating blue eyes that could make employees squirm and contractors double-check their work, remained sharp and clear. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice raspier than I recalled but still commanding, "then I've passed on. First, let me address the formal aspects of my estate." He proceeded to outline the expected bequests, personal items to various family members, charitable donations to his favorite causes, and provisions for long-term employees. Then came the business details most had been waiting for. "To my son Jackson, I leave 30% of Williams' construction shares and the position of Chief Operations Officer, subject to board approval." Jackson's triumphant glance in my direction wasn't subtle. "To my wife Diana, I leave our vacation home in Scottsdale and a trust fund of $2 million. Diana dabbed at non-existent tears, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she moved. There was no mention of me yet, and I could feel the weighted silence, the sideways glances. This was playing out exactly as everyone had expected. Then my father shifted in his seat, leaning closer to the camera. Now there are some truths that need to be spoken, and some wrongs I need to right while I still can. The room temperature seemed to drop. Jackson straightened in his chair. For most of my life, I measured success in dollars and contracts. I thought legacy meant buildings with my name on the cornerstone and a company that would outlive me. It took facing my own mortality to realize how wrong I've been. My father took a labored breath. 3 years ago, my youngest son Carleton walked out of my house after I said unforgivable things to him. I've regretted those words every day since. A collective intake of breath filled the room. This was not the script anyone had expected. I tried to contact Carleton numerous times over the past year. I wrote letters, made phone calls, even asked mutual acquaintances to reach out. Somehow, these attempts never seemed to reach him. My heart pounded as I remembered what Zachary had told me. Dad had been trying to contact me. It wasn't until I began putting my affairs in order that I discovered why. Dad's expression hardened on screen. Jackson, I know you intercepted my letters to your brother. I know you blocked my attempts to reconcile with him. All eyes turned to Jackson, whose face had drained of color. I also know about the Westfield development project, my father continued, his voice taking on a steely edge. I know about the kickbacks, the substitution of inferior materials, the falsified inspection reports. I have copies of all the documentation. Jackson half rose from his seat. This is outrageous. Anthony, stop this right now. Anthony made no move toward the computer. Your father's instructions were to play this in its entirety, Jackson. On screen, Dad continued. An independent audit has revealed that under Jackson's management, nearly $8 million have been embezzled from the company over the past 2 years through fraudulent subcontracting arrangements with companies he secretly owns. Diana grabbed Jackson's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence. Jackson, I raised you to be better than this. I trusted you with my life's work, and you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. You put profit above integrity, greed above family. You kept me from making amends with your brother, because you were afraid of losing your position as sole heir. My father's face softened slightly. And Diana, I know about your affair with Thomas Griffith. I know you've been planning to leave me since my diagnosis. I've amended our prenuptial agreement accordingly. Diana's gasp was audible. Her face, usually composed into camera-ready perfection, crumpled in shock. The video continued relentlessly, my father systematically dismantling the carefully constructed narratives that Jackson and Diana had built around themselves. With each revelation, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for all the wasted years, all the missed opportunities for reconciliation. Finally, my father looked directly into the camera, as if he could see through time and space to where I sat watching. His eyes, so like my own, seemed to fill with regret. Carleton, he said, his voice softening. My son, I have 3 words for you that I should have said years ago. The room fell completely silent. I was wrong. I was wrong. My father's words hung in the air of the conference room, leaving everyone stunned into silence. On screen, he continued, his voice growing stronger despite his frail appearance. I was wrong to measure your worth by how closely you followed my path. I was wrong to dismiss your talents because they were different from mine. Most of all, I was wrong to let my pride keep me from telling you how proud I am of the man you've become. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall in front of the family that had rejected me for so long. Over the past year, I've collected everything I could find about your work, Dad continued. Your designs, your awards, articles about projects you've led. I had Anthony hire a private investigator to track your career when my own attempts to reach you were blocked. The lawyer nodded solemnly from where he stood by the projector. What I discovered was that you've built something remarkable on your own terms. Without my name, without my money, without my connections. You've earned every bit of your success through talent and hard work. In many ways, you're more like me than Jackson ever was. You're a builder, just with different tools. Jackson made a strangled sound of protest, but was silenced by a look from Anthony. When I realized I was running out of time, I decided to make changes to my will, Dad said. Changes that reflect not just the truth about what's happened in this family, but my wishes for its future. He shifted in his seat, wincing slightly with pain that he quickly masked. To my son Carleton, I leave 60% controlling interest in Williams Construction, along with the position of Chief Executive Officer. The room erupted in chaos. Jackson leapt to his feet, shouting about contests and mental competency. Diana knocked over a water glass, the liquid spreading across the polished table like a flood. Relatives I barely knew turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from shock to sudden, calculated reevaluation. Anthony paused the video and raised his hands for silence. Please, everyone. There's more. Once the room quieted, the video resumed. My father's expression was now resolute. This decision isn't made out of sentimentality or last-minute guilt. It's a business decision as much as a personal one. Carleton has demonstrated the creativity, integrity, and vision that Williams Construction needs to move forward. The company requires new direction, new ideas, and leadership untainted by the ethical compromises of recent years. He looked straight into the camera again. Carleton, I know this comes as a shock. You've built your own life, your own career. You may want nothing to do with the family business, and if that's your decision, Anthony has instructions for alternative arrangements. But I hope you'll consider taking on this role. Not for my sake, but because I believe you can transform the company into something better than I ever made it. My mind reeled, trying to process this complete reversal of everything I'd believed about my father's feelings toward me. There are conditions, Dad continued. First, the transfer of controlling interest will only occur if a full forensic audit confirms the financial irregularities I've discovered. Anthony has all the documentation. Dad paused, taking a labored breath. Second, I ask that you consider keeping the Williams name on the company. Not for my ego, but for the hundreds of employees who have made their livelihoods there. They shouldn't suffer for the mistakes of leadership. He shifted again, and I could see pain briefly cross his features. Finally, the estate will fund a full criminal investigation into the fraudulent activities that have occurred under Jackson's management. I don't make this decision lightly. He's my son, and I've failed him in many ways. But actions must have consequences. Jackson's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is insane. He was heavily medicated when he made this. I'll contest every word of it. Anthony paused the video again. Jackson, your father anticipated your reaction. That's why he asked me to have his mental competency thoroughly documented by 3 independent psychiatric evaluations before recording this will. All confirmed he was of sound mind. Additionally, he reached into his briefcase and removed a thick folder. These are the results of the preliminary forensic audit, along with sworn statements from contractors involved in the kickback scheme. Your father was very thorough in building his case. While Jackson sputtered, Anthony resumed the video. My father now looked tired, the effort of the recording clearly taking its toll. There's one more thing, he said. In the bottom drawer of my home office desk is a journal I've kept this past year. It's addressed to you, Carleton. It contains everything I wish I'd had the courage to say in person. His eyes softened. I also want you to know that I kept every letter you sent while you were in college. Every exhibition announcement. Every clipping about your work. I was too stubborn to tell you, but never too indifferent to stop caring. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd always assumed he'd thrown away those letters, those small attempts I'd made to keep some connection despite our differences. Diana, Dad continued, his tone cooling noticeably. In light of what I've learned about your relationship with Thomas and your plans regarding my estate, the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause is in effect. You'll receive a settlement of $100,000, not the provisions mentioned earlier. The Scottsdale property will be sold, with proceeds going to the company pension fund. Diana's face contorted with fury. You can't do this to me. I took care of you. I sat by your hospital bed, while texting your lover about which of my watches you plan to sell first. My father countered from beyond the grave, with a hint of the dry wit I'd forgotten he possessed. The video was nearing its end. Dad looked exhausted now, but somehow more at peace than I'd seen him in years. Carleton, I know one recorded message can't make up for years of misunderstanding. I know an inheritance can't heal the wounds we've inflicted on each other. But I hope it can be a beginning, a chance to reclaim some of what we lost. I was wrong, son, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. The screen went black, and for several heartbeats, no one in the room moved or spoke. The silence was finally broken by the sound of a chair scraping back violently as Jackson stood. This is far from over, he snarled, pointing at me. You think you can waltz back after 3 years and take everything? I built this company while you were playing with your art projects. Actually, Jackson, Anthony interjected, the evidence suggests you were dismantling the company for your personal gain. The FBI has already been provided with the relevant documentation. Jackson's face went from red to white in an instant. You had no right. That was private family business. Financial fraud isn't family business, Anthony replied calmly. It's criminal activity. Jackson grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair. Diana, we're leaving. I'm calling Gerald Hoffman right now. He named the most aggressive attorney in the state. Diana stood shakily, her perfect composure completely shattered. She turned to me, eyes blazing. Your father was a lonely, bitter old man, manipulated by lawyers and doctors. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking clearly enough to figure out what you two were doing, I replied, finding my voice at last. How many of my letters did you intercept, Diana? How many times did you tell him I refused to speak to him when he tried to call? Her silence was confirmation enough. As they stormed toward the door, Jackson turned back. This isn't over, Carleton. Not by a long shot. I'll destroy what's left of this company before I let you have it. The door slammed behind them, leaving the rest of the family in stunned silence. One by one, relatives began to gather their things, murmuring awkward condolences or congratulations, clearly unsure which was more appropriate. Soon only Anthony, Aunt Teresa, and I remained in the conference room. Aunt Teresa moved to sit beside me, taking my hand in hers. Your mother would be so proud of you right now. For what? I asked, still trying to process everything that had happened. I haven't done anything. You came back, she said simply. Despite everything, you came back to say goodbye. That took courage. Anthony cleared his throat. There's more we need to discuss, Carleton. Your father left detailed instructions about the transition of leadership at the company, should you choose to accept the position. I looked up at the now blank screen, where my father's face had been just minutes before. I need some time to think. Of course, Anthony nodded. But there's something else you should see first. He handed me a key. Your father's home office. The journal he mentioned. I think you'll want to read it before making any decisions. As I took the key, I felt the weight of it in my palm. A small piece of metal that somehow represented everything that had been lost, and everything that might still be salvaged from the wreckage of our family. The drive to my father's house felt surreal. Streets I'd known all my life seemed both familiar and strange, like revisiting a place you've only seen in dreams. The sprawling Tudor-style home looked exactly as I remembered, immaculately maintained gardens, imposing double oak doors, the Williams construction flag flying alongside the American one on the front pole. Using the key Anthony had given me, I let myself in, half expecting to hear my father's booming voice calling from his study or the clink of ice in Diana's perpetual evening cocktail. Instead, the house was silent, with that peculiar emptiness that follows death, as if the building itself knew its owner was never coming back. I made my way to Dad's office, a room I'd rarely been allowed to enter as a child. The heavy door swung open to reveal the sanctum, where so many business decisions had been made. Dark walnut paneling, leather chairs, and the massive desk that had always made me feel small, even as an adult. Everything was meticulously organized, each item in its place, just like the man himself. I sat in his chair, running my fingers over the smooth desktop. Following my father's instructions, I opened the bottom right drawer. There it was, a leather-bound journal with no markings on the cover. Beside it lay a stack of envelopes tied with string, and with a start, I recognized my own handwriting on the top one. These were the letters I'd sent from college, the ones I'd thought he'd discarded unread. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. On the first page, in my father's precise architectural handwriting, were the words, "For Carleton, things I should have said." What followed were dated entries spanning the past year, his diagnosis, his reflections on life and regrets, and most surprisingly, detailed thoughts about my work and career. He'd collected press clippings about my projects, printed screenshots of my professional portfolio, even reached out to clients I'd worked with to ask about my professionalism and creativity. March 15 saw Carleton's design for the Westbrook Museum expansion online today. Extraordinary use of natural light and space. He's created something that will stand the test of time, just as I always wanted him to do. Just not in the way I expected. My stubborn pride cost me the chance to tell him how impressive his work has become. Page after page revealed a father I never knew existed, one who'd been proud of me but too rigid to express it, one who'd been trying to reach across the divide between us, but had been thwarted by the very people he'd trusted most. The most painful entries detailed his discovery of Jackson's betrayal and Diana's infidelity. He described the shock of finding financial irregularities while reviewing company records during his illness, the devastation of overhearing Diana on the phone with her lover, planning their future with his money. May 2 confirmed today what I've suspected about Jackson's side companies. The evidence is irrefutable. Where did I go wrong with him? Did I model the wrong values, or just fail to see who he truly was? My business success means nothing if this is the legacy I'm leaving behind. As I read further, I found multiple references to his attempts to contact me, calls made that never reached me, letters written that were mysteriously lost in the mail, messages sent through acquaintances that never arrived. June 8 asked Zachary Feldman for Carleton's current address again. Diana accidentally spilled coffee on the paper where I'd written it down yesterday. This is the third such accident in 2 weeks. I'm beginning to see a pattern that should have been obvious sooner. By the time I finished reading, night had fallen. I sat in my father's chair in the dark, processing everything I'd learned. The father I'd believed had rejected me completely had actually been reaching out, trying to make amends in his final months. The brother I'd merely thought preferred a different path had actively worked to keep our family divided. The woman my father had married had been plotting against him while he was dying. My phone buzzed with a text from Zachary. "Heard about what happened at the will reading. You okay?" I replied asking if he could meet me at Dad's house. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in the kitchen, 2 beers open between us as I showed him parts of the journal. "I had no idea it was this bad," Zachary said, shaking his head. "I knew Jackson had changed, become more aggressive in business, but fraud. Embezzlement. Anthony says the FBI is already investigating. There's too much evidence to sweep under the rug." Zachary took a thoughtful sip of his beer. "So what are you going to do?" "About the company, I mean." It was the question I'd been asking myself since leaving the lawyer's office. "I don't know. Construction isn't my world. I've built my own career, my own reputation in a completely different industry." "True," Zachary nodded. "But management is management. Vision is vision. And there are hundreds of people who depend on Williams Construction for their livelihoods." Before I could respond, my phone rang, Anthony Winters calling with news that couldn't wait until morning. "Jackson has just tried to access the company's main accounts," he said without preamble. Fortunately, I placed a freeze on all major financial transactions as soon as the will was read. He's also been seen removing files from the main office. Can he be stopped? Security is on site now. But Carleton, this situation requires immediate attention. The company needs leadership. Employees will be showing up tomorrow with no idea what's happening. After hanging up, I turned to Zachary. I need to go to the office. Tonight. Want some company? We drove to Williams' construction headquarters, a modern 3-story building my father had designed himself. The security guard recognized me immediately. Whether from family resemblance or having been briefed by Anthony, I wasn't sure. Mr. Williams, sir. Mr. Winters called ahead. He's inside with the security team. The main office was in disarray, drawers left open, file cabinets emptied onto the floor. Jackson had clearly been looking for something specific and hadn't cared about the mess he left behind. Anthony met us in the conference room, where 3 security officers were reviewing footage. Jackson and 2 men we don't recognize spent almost an hour in here before our team arrived. They took several hard drives and file boxes. Do we know what they were after? Based on what your father documented, likely evidence of the fraudulent subcontracting scheme. But your father was thorough. All the critical documentation is already safe with the FBI and my office. I spent the next several hours with Anthony, reviewing the immediate steps needed to stabilize the company. By dawn, we had drafted an emergency communication to all employees, scheduled a meeting with the executive team, and prepared a statement for major clients. As the sun rose, I stood at the window of what had been my father's office, looking out over the city he had helped build. So many of the commercial structures visible from this vantage point bore the Williams Construction logo on their cornerstones. It was a legacy of physical monuments, buildings of steel, glass, and concrete that would stand for decades. But what about the other legacy? The hundreds of families supported by the company payroll. The clients who trusted the Williams name. The business partners who had relationships spanning generations. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea what you're getting into. Walk away now. Jay. Instead of fear, I felt a sudden clarity. This wasn't just about an inheritance or a family business. This was about right and wrong, about honoring my father's final wishes, about protecting people who depended on the company my grandfather had started and my father had built. I turned to Anthony, who was organizing papers at the conference table. I'll do it. I'll take the position. He looked up, studying my face. Are you certain? Once we announce this, there's no easy way back. I'm certain, I said, surprised by the conviction in my voice. But I'm doing it my way. The company needs transformation, not just transition. Over the next several days, I moved with decisive action. I met with the executive team, many of whom had suspected problems under Jackson's leadership but had been afraid to speak up. I held a company-wide meeting to introduce myself and address the rumors head-on. I reached out personally to our largest clients to assure them of continuity and commitment to ethical business practices. Jackson, meanwhile, was not going quietly. He filed lawsuits challenging the will, the psychiatric evaluations, and my right to assume leadership. Diana gave tearful interviews to local media, painting herself as the devoted wife blindsided by posthumous accusations. But the evidence my father had compiled was overwhelming. Bank records showed suspicious transfers. Contractors came forward with details of the kickback scheme. Internal documents revealed systematic quality compromises that could have led to dangerous structural issues in several projects. 2 weeks after the funeral, the FBI arrested Jackson at his country club, leading him out in handcuffs past stunned members. Diana fled to Arizona the same day, emptying their joint accounts before disappearing. Through it all, I kept my focus on the company, learning its operations, meeting employees at all levels, developing a vision for its future that honored its past while embracing new possibilities. I brought in my own expertise in digital design and sustainability, areas where construction was rapidly evolving but Williams had lagged behind. 1 month after taking the helm, I stood before the company's annual client appreciation event, my first major public appearance as CEO. Looking out at the gathered faces, employees, clients, community leaders, I felt my father's presence beside me, not as a looming shadow of disapproval, but as a foundation upon which I could build something new. Williams Construction has stood for integrity and quality for over 40 years, I began. Those values will never change. But how we express them, how we build for the future, that's where our new chapter begins. As I outlined our vision for the future, sustainable building practices, digital integration, community-focused development, I realized that in some unexpected way, my father and I had finally found common ground. Just not in the way either of us could have predicted. 6 months after my father's funeral, I stood in the newly renovated headquarters of Williams Design and Construction. The space reflected the company's evolution: open collaborative areas replacing stuffy offices, digital design stations alongside traditional drafting tables, and abundant natural light flooding through the energy-efficient windows we now featured in all our projects. The transition hadn't been easy. Jackson's legal challenges dragged on for months before the mounting evidence against him forced a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison, and full restitution of the embezzled funds. Diana eventually surfaced in Scottsdale, where she'd tried to claim ownership of the vacation home. When that failed, she attempted to sell her story to a tabloid TV show, only to be countered with a defamation suit that quickly silenced her. More challenging than the legal battles was earning the trust of longtime employees and clients who had known my father for decades and viewed me as the prodigal son who'd abandoned the family business. I didn't try to be my father. That would have been impossible and disingenuous. Instead, I brought my own strengths to the role, combining his foundation of integrity with my vision for innovation. I kept my promise to honor the Williams name, but added my own stamp by expanding into sustainable design services. We now offered not just construction, but comprehensive environmental design solutions, bringing together my background in digital media and architecture with the company's construction expertise. On this particular morning, I was preparing for the dedication of our first major completed project under my leadership, the Robert Williams Memorial Arts Center, built on land my father had purchased years ago for commercial development. I'd repurposed the project as a community arts hub, with affordable studio spaces, galleries, and education facilities. As I adjusted my tie in the reflection of my office window, I caught sight of the framed photograph on my desk. My father and me at a fishing lake when I was about 10, both of us grinning widely, holding up our catch. Beside it sat his journal, which I'd read cover to cover multiple times, each reading revealing new insights into the complex man who had been my father. Aunt Teresa knocked lightly on my open door. "Car's waiting downstairs. You ready for this?" In the months since the funeral, she had become my staunchest ally and unofficial family historian, filling in gaps in my understanding of my father's life and our family's past. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, grabbing my jacket. The dedication ceremony was well attended: city officials, arts community leaders, company employees, and local media. As I stepped up to the podium, I saw Zachary in the front row with his family, giving me an encouraging thumbs up. "Today we're not just opening a building," I began, looking out at the gathered faces. "We're opening a new chapter for our community and for Williams Design and Construction." My father built structures that sheltered businesses, supported commerce, and shaped our city's skyline. Today, we expand that legacy to include spaces that nurture creativity, foster community, and enrich our cultural landscape. As I spoke about the center's features and the local artists who would benefit from the space, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The anger and resentment that had defined my relationship with my father for so long had gradually transformed into something more nuanced, a recognition of our shared humanity, flaws and all. Through therapy sessions and long conversations with those who had known him best, I'd come to understand my father in ways I never had while he was alive. His drive for success had been fueled not by greed, but by the insecurity of a man who grew up poor. His rigidity came from fear that without strict control, everything he'd built could collapse. His inability to accept my chosen path stemmed not from disappointment, but from genuine concern that I would struggle as he had early in his life. None of this excused the harsh words or the years of estrangement, but it helped me contextualize them. He had been a man of his generation, limited by the emotional vocabulary available to him, trying his best with the tools he had. After the ceremony, as guests explored the new center, I found myself in the main gallery where we'd hung an exhibition of local artists' work. Among them was a piece I'd created specifically for the space, a digital media installation that incorporated architectural elements from my father's most significant buildings, transformed through light and sound into an immersive experience. Harold Benson, my father's old friend from the board, stood studying it thoughtfully. "You know," he said as I approached, "your father wouldn't have understood this piece at all." I smiled, acknowledging the truth in his statement. "But," Harold continued, "he would have been proud as hell that you made it. The last few times we had lunch, all he talked about was finding a way to reconcile with you. He said he'd finally realized that your different path wasn't a rejection of him, but a courage he wished he'd had himself." That evening, after the crowds had gone and the center stood quiet in the twilight, I sat alone on a bench in the courtyard. The space featured a small fountain made from stone, salvaged from the first building my grandfather had constructed, a physical connection between past and future. The journey of healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be. The complicated relationship with my father couldn't be fully resolved after his death. But I'd found a way to honor both his legacy and my own path, to take what was valuable from his life while charting my own course. In the months since taking over the company, I'd made sure to maintain balance in my life, refusing to fall into the workaholic pattern that had consumed my father. I still created my own art, taught occasional design workshops at the local college, and made time for friendships that had nothing to do with business or family obligations. The company thrived under this new approach. We'd retained most of my father's long-term employees, while bringing in fresh talent drawn to our innovative direction. Projects that combined traditional construction excellence with cutting-edge, sustainable design had attracted national attention. We were building something new on the foundation my father had created, exactly as he'd hoped in his final message. As darkness fell and the courtyard lights automatically illuminated, solar-powered, of course, I thought about the strange, painful, ultimately redemptive journey that had brought me here. The public humiliation at the funeral that had given way to vindication. The broken family bonds that had revealed deeper truths. The father I'd thought I'd lost forever who had, in his final act, found a way to reach across the divide between us. Some might see it as a story about inheritance or justice or family drama. But for me, it had become something more profound, a lesson in the possibility of growth even after loss, of finding forgiveness not by forgetting the past, but by understanding it more completely, of building new beginnings from painful endings. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I'd found in my father's desk, one I hadn't known existed. It showed him standing in the back of a gallery at my first professional exhibition 5 years ago. He had come without telling me, had seen my work without my knowledge. In the image, he stood studying one of my pieces, his expression a complex mixture of confusion and pride. Life rarely gives us perfect resolutions or clean endings. My father and I never had the conversation we needed to have while he was alive. The wounds of our relationship couldn't be completely healed by his posthumous revelations. But in the broken pieces of our family story, I'd found enough truth to build something meaningful, both in business and in my understanding of the complicated man who had been my father. As I prepare to lock up the arts center that bears his name but reflects my vision, I wonder what lessons you might take from my story. Have you experienced similar family conflicts? Have you found ways to forgive those who hurt you, even when reconciliation wasn't possible? Or are you still holding onto resentments that might be keeping you from your own healing? I'd truly like to know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing it with others who might need to hear that even the deepest family wounds can become pathways to unexpected growth. Sometimes the most powerful words we can hear or say are simply, "I was wrong." Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own journey of healing and reconciliation.